Hello everyone, and welcome to the second video of my most popular torpedo series, this time with full commentary. In this video I'll be going over 3 ships and their fitting, not including the praxis you see on screen. The praxis is just in the background for my opening. Unfortunately, this praxis meets its end later in a gate camp shortly after this footage, so I didn't really get any more footage of the praxis. I have some salvage footage from before my hard drive crashed that will be included in this video, so you may notice some quality changes on some of the videos, and that is because I was using different recording software. So just in general, torpedo brawling and brawling itself has gotten a lot harder since my last Torpedo Dreams video, but I continue to do my best in actual solo brawler fits to try to show that brawling is still viable. Some of the changes CCP has made some improvements to brawling, such as the T2 ammo changes, while others have not necessarily made it worse, but less interesting or even riskier to brawl. Examples of this can be the resistance changes, the constant buffs to hull tanking, and things like abyssal cap batteries and hack recharge rates. You end up kind of getting perma-tackled by certain hacks out there. So, but anyway, in this video, I've lost about 2 to 3 of each of these ships, more in some cases, probably like 5 or 6 in cases of the Rokh, to get the footage here. And this is just kind of get at least decent fights. I would have liked to have gotten 1 or 2 more, quote unquote good fights. But I've been kind of collecting this footage and trying to compile this for about 3 months now, or 4 months, basically since I came back from my break. And I think at this point I just kind of want to get this footage out there, get it compiled, and share it. That way I can focus more time on other ships and fitting for future videos that are not torpedo related. And here's kind of a good example of the, being perma-tackled by a hack here in the praxis footage. And my praxis here is actually kind of a meme fit. I had it fit with a burst jammer and had no prop on it because I couldn't get it through fitting because, torpedo fitting is awesome. This particular Icky had 4 rattlesnakes supporting it, so in the last moment I heated my burst jammer as the only way to get out of this Icky's tackle, Icky Tursa, and I was able to get away. We're going to start out with the Typhoon fleet issue, which I've shown you guys a few times before, but just to quickly recap for anyone new. This is the torpedo battleship I've used for quite a few years. I've retained the hull tank that I've used because it allows me to fit dual heavy newts, and plus hull tank is a lot cheaper than the alternative, which is armor tanking, which costs 1.3 billion for a comparable fit. With Rage, torpedoes, and 5 Ogre 2s, I'm doing about 1600 DPS, close to 2000 if I heat and use a 5% damage booster. So this used to be my favorite torpedo battleship, but here recently I've actually enjoyed the Barghest a lot more, which I'll explain more of that when I get to the Barghest. But having your damage split between torpedoes and drones can be sometimes not ideal because you really want to rely on the alpha of the torpedoes, but with some of your damage split into drones, you're kind of taking away that potential volley amount. In this case, we're probably doing closer to about 1300 DPS with Rage torpedoes compared to the 1600 you're seeing here because 300 of that is drones. In this first fight, I ran across a Hyperion and this Crow and one of my other ships in a Nestor, so I quickly reship to my Typhoon fleet issue because my Nestor can't fight a Hyperion, doesn't have the DPS. So I quickly just basically 2 or 3 shot this Crow, and then I prepare for the Hyperion coming in. This is actually probably like 1 or 2 weeks since I returned to Eve, so I was still kind of rusty here, so I make some poor judgment calls in the very beginning for setting up my range. and not utilizing one of the main strengths of the Typhoon fleet issue, which is its low signature for battleship. As you can see here, I go to just keep it range at 7,500 when I should have orbited at 5,000 or so, or even a little bit farther away. May not have helped a whole lot, but again, with battleship tracking, the Typhoon fleet issue is actually a smaller sig than most battleships. But as you can see, with the T2 ammo changes, I'm able just to do massive volleys to the Hyperion. And this Hyperion actually did have a reactive armor hardener, which are normally hard counters to most of my fits, just because they'll, fully change by the time I start really getting into their low armor. But in this case, because I was doing so much damage, I was able to basically win the race of the reactive armor hardener switching to full explosive resistance, and just, causing them to bleed structure in between reps. So that was one of the big benefits to the T2 ammo change, is that it allowed my volley amount to increase and kind of beat reactive armor hardeners on certain ships. This next fight is an older fight, probably a year or so ago. Basically, I was roaming around and I ran into a brave gang, and their vagabond tackled me. And this shows a good example of like the alpha of torpedoes, because he was ADC'd at one point and then he fully repped up, but he was bleeding into structure. So once his ADCU turned off, then it just wiped him out with one more volley. So I see local spiking here, so I go ahead and MJD before I get dogpiled. I kill the executioner on my way out, and timed it really well because that Crusader landed at 13 kilometers, and most likely he was going to have a scram. So I was able to get out of there and warp off before the Crusader retackled me. I do believe, though, I get retackled by this gang at some other point, and I do actually die, but I don't have that footage. I think they combat pro'd me, and I warped to a belt, and they already had someone there. So, but again, it still shows a good example of the alpha of torpedoes. And for the next ship, it's going to be my Barghest. You guys have probably seen this before. I've shown it in other videos, although this fit has been modified from what you've seen before. So what's really important to me on my torpedo battleships, especially like the Typhoon fleet issue and the Barghest, is that they have a dual utility highs. And my original Barghest could only fit one medium newt and one heavy newt. And so I've made some changes, mainly by using the Dreadgouris's torpedo launchers, so that way I can squeeze in a second heavy newt. And having two heavy newts is really useful because you can split them, put one on, one frigate each to try to like cap out interceptors, or you can stagger them to cap out an interceptor that might be trying to ram you. So it allows you to MJD or get an MJD cycle off when you really need it. Alternatively, just puts cap pressure on like cruisers and things like that, or T3 destroyer or T3 cruisers. Heavy newts are useful to an extent on battleships or against battleships. It's just with the way 3200s are, they just don't really do a whole lot anymore. But again, I still like having those dual heavy newts, so that's why I have gone with the Dreadgouris's torpedo launchers, which surprisingly, they're not that expensive. It's only about another 200 mil on the fit. So the price has gotten a little bit more manageable. It's about like 30 or 40 million per launcher. With the hull tank, again, this is also a hull tank battleship because it just makes sense that way due to fitting issues, and trying to armor tank the Barghest, it ends up costing more and actually you get less tank out of it. So again, with those HP buffs that CCP gave, it just kind of buffed battleship hull tanks across the board, so there's really not a reason not to use them right now. In combination with that, you also have the abyssal damage control, which this is one I rolled myself using decayed mutaplasmids, and it took me probably a few tries to get one where I was able to get a percentage increase across the board. In this case, it was like 3% on EM, 2% on thermal, and then 1% on kinetic and explosive. But that all together increased the EHP on this by probably about 3 or 4,000. So really cheap investment to get more bang for the buck. And then when comparing it to the Typhoon Fleet issue and why this is my new favorite, if you look at the DPS, they're pretty comparable. The Typhoon Fleet issue was also around 1600 with Rage missiles, but again, that was with drones. So in reality, you're about 1300 DPS, whereas this one can only field a flight of hammerheads, which is about 150 DPS. So if we take that 150 off of the 1690 here, we're still doing, over 1500 DPS just in missiles alone. And the volley amount is also higher by about 1,000. But with that 5% damage booster, you're just barely touching 12,000 raw alpha on a torpedo Barghest. And when you compare that to things like like a Macarial, like an Arty Macarial, and 1400 Arty Macarial has a 12.4k alpha. So with the Barghest, you're basically slinging close range artillery with no tracking issues because of how I have them fit, and you're able to apply a large chunk of that alpha even against things like frigates. Even though it's mitigating a lot of that damage, let's just say you're doing 10k alpha, and a frigate's able to mitigate 60% of that, you're still getting a 4k volley before resistances. So that's why torpedoes are when fit this way, still do a lot of damage to frigates even if you're not getting full application. This first fight with the Barghest is a little bit different than what you guys may normally be expecting. This is actually more of a small gang fight. It was me and 2 other corp mates. Basically, they were roaming and they were getting kind of harassed by Kronos. And there's only 3 of us, and kind of 3 against 1 Kronos, or any marauder in general, is normally not the greatest of ideas because of how much they can tank. But in this case, I had my torpedo Barghest, and one of the other corp mates shipped into a Dominic's Navy issue. So with our DPS combined, we were doing 3,000 DPS just with the 2 battleships, and then we had a Drekavac in our gang as well. So the kind of how this played out is that the Navy Dami went out to kind of bait the fight on the station, which, kind of a side tangent here, but man, it sure is nice to get fights on stations and not citadels, kind of like how it used to be where fights would escalate a lot more naturally instead of just getting blacked by the citadel. Anyway, though, once he got tackled by the Brutix, and then the Kronos warped in to, try and kill him. That's when I warped in from our wormhole and warped straight to him. And the fight starts out with me first killing the Brutix off because it had him scrammed. And this Brutix was an armor Brutix, surprisingly, not hull tanked. So you're able to see how well my rage torpedoes applied to the Brutix. I basically, 2 or 3 shot what's left of them. And then we focus our attention over to the Kronos. And it kind of surprised all of us, but with how much volley damage I was getting here, I think I was doing anywhere from 3,500 to 4,500 in volley on this Kronos. So basically each volley was just chunking the armor on the Kronos. It was doing 50% damage on each volley. And in this case, the Kronos started repping a little late, which allowed us to bleed into his structure. And then once he does rep, he does a full rep. But again, with my volley amount, it just takes him right back to 50% armor immediately. That allows the Dominic's and the Drekavac to kind of start punching through, and every time he bleeds a little bit more structure. So this is just a really good showcase of, even though that Kronos might have been able to tank more than 3,000 DPS, when you have a high volley amount, you're able to just bypass active tanks like that. And a lot of people don't expect that out of the subcaps, especially like a Barghest, because they just think they're rapid heavies or something like that. So it's a useful ship to to kind of bait fights with because they don't know what to expect, and you just have so much volley damage you can bypass really stubborn active tanks. This next fight I was roaming through Nullsec, came across a staging system, and I kind of hung around for 10 minutes or so and lured this gang back to a gate. They had the VNI on the other side, and he was the first one that scrammed me, so I went ahead and focused on him, neuted him out, and kind of they all start piling through now. Thankfully, there was only the VNI and then this Jag that had scrams, at least as far as I'm aware of. Some of them were kind of sitting far out, so I don't know if they had scrams that just didn't burn in for whatever reason. But once I tackle the Jag, I switch to Scourge, so I have the most damage possible to him. Because my goal is to try and kill him before he can ADC. You know, maybe he doesn't expect the damage, or he forgets. I put one nude on him just maybe to hopefully cap him out to prevent him using the ADCU. Thankfully he doesn't ADCU, and I actually kill him really quick here. And once he goes down, I decided to go ahead and MJD. I kind of wish I had stayed a little longer because I think I could have killed a few more ships here. But I just don't want to take the chance because more was coming through, and I don't know if those other ships had scrams, they just haven't used them yet. So once I MJD though, I go ahead and just warp off to the wormhole and get safe and dock up. This next fight is starts out with me actually being in my wormhole, and I undocked and noticed there was an Armageddon trying to roll our Nullsec static. So I go ahead and reship into my Barghest and warp down, and thankfully he just jumped through the wormhole back to the Nullsec side, so he's now polarized. So I go ahead and tackle him. The video's been sped up because unfortunately this Armageddon is a full hull tank fit, and it just takes a long time for me to kind of chew through him. He unfortunately didn't have like any damage mods or anything like that on him. He was just strictly all tank. I think he had 3 newts, but you know, he didn't even have drones, and it's just like, you know, if you're gonna use a rolling ship, why don't you at least put drones in it, especially since it's bonus to it. My hope was, because previously the system did have a few people in it, my hope was that as I'm killing him they'll warp more things in, which they do. They end up warping a slasher and a VNI, and being that this is horde space, I was hoping, you know, it would kind of escalate slowly to where I could, you know, get a bigger fight here. So the Armageddon goes down, and then the V9 lands, and he lands right on top of the wormhole. So I was expecting he was just going to jump into the wormhole once it started doing damage, but for some weird reason, people just don't like jumping into wormholes, even though I was by myself through this. So I pretty much, you know, kill him pretty quick. He doesn't really do a whole lot of damage here against the Torpedo Barghest DPS. As soon as he dies, I scram the slasher and kill him pretty quick as well. I was hoping this would have escalated further, but Horde took a little bit to get anything together, and in typical Horde fashion, once they do get together, then it's just a massive blob that you can't fight. So I went ahead and just, I think I stuck around for a few more minutes, and a few things trickled in, but nothing else warped to the hole, so I went ahead and just kind of disengaged from here. It was nice though fighting in the system, because this system used to be the system I lived in when I lived in Nullsec. So that was kind of an interesting fight in that system. So the last fight in the Barghest is in Syndicate. I ended up kind of scouting these guys out or seeing them in the system for a little bit, so I kind of hung around to see what they would do. They chased me with Interceptor, which I killed in 2 shots. They had this Blackbird decloaked next to me, which I'm still a little salty about not getting scram on him, even though I had him target locked. But he warped off to a ping, and then this Harbinger Navy lands next to me, so I quickly switched to Nova Rage, and I overheat to try and get as much damage on him before the Blackbird jams me. This is actually a really not smart fight to take because of the Falcon, and then they had the Mega and the Typhoon. But I mean, honestly, I was just bored and I wanted to fight something, so this is the best I could get with my Nullsec static. Thankfully, I was able to just melt this Navy Harb, and actually I get jammed when he was at like 1% structure, but my drones finished him off. And at this point I could have warped off because they only had me webbed for whatever reason, but I wanted to stick around just because I wanted to try and get a better fight. But unfortunately I kind of just get perma-jammed by the Falcon here. And I don't know what they're doing because they had that Typhoon there that landed next to me, but then they warp it off. If that Typhoon had stayed and added a second tackle, they could have held me indefinitely, but for whatever reason he just warps off. I guess people doing stupid things with alts, so that's fine. Um, at this point I go ahead and switch to my EC drones, and I'm just waiting for the Falcon to miss a jam, as normally they miss at least one jam, especially since my ECM skills or ECCM skills are maxed out. I'm just hoping I can get that, and he does finally miss a jam here, and I put all my drones, everything on the Mega. I'm expecting to get jammed here again soon, but my hope here is that the EC drones are going to jam the Mega so I can warp off. As I'm doing that, yeah, see right here he jams me again, but as I'm doing that, they keep warping in things at pings instead of directly to their Mega. So again, they're missing tons of opportunities here to re-tackle me. But I go ahead and just stay aligned, and my EC drones finally jam the Mega, and I warp off here. And I have a feeling that Mega had no damage mods because he wasn't doing a bunch of damage to me. He was probably also max hull tank. So that's just, kind of the things you got to deal with when you're brawling, is just constantly running into hull tank battleships and hull tank battlecruisers. I go ahead and safe up, make a couple safes, and then I think I go to the NPC station here to repair, and then I head back to the wormhole after a little bit. The final ship I'll be showing off here is going to be the Rokh. So, something a lot of people may not be familiar with, or maybe have never really thought about, is that the Rokh has 4 torpedo launchers on it, or, well, it has 4 launcher slots. So what I've done with it is I put 4 torpedoes on it, and then put 4 heavy newts on it. So this turns it kind of into a missile platform. It's pretty much a meme. It is both a really good ship and a really bad ship all at the same time. It's good if you can find proper targets to fight with, and you can try and get them isolated or at least delay reinforcements. It's bad though if you end up running into more than probably 2 people in it, because you just get overwhelmed. The DPS on it is not bad, but it's like you're basically flying a battle cruiser in a battleship hull. If you're using rage missiles, which apply fine to like battle cruisers, you can do up to about 900 DPS, which is pretty good. But in most cases, if you're fighting something smaller than that, you're going to be using faction missiles, which you're doing at about 620 DPS. The newts are obviously your main benefit here, because as long as you can get something isolated, you can kind of cap them out and bypass any active tank they have and just kill them really quickly. If you fight 2 people, you can kind of manage, because you can use 2 heavy newts on one person, 2 heavy newts on another, and that will allow you to kind of cap out 2 targets at the same time. But again, once you get past that, or you start running into tankier targets that are like buffer fit, you kind of start losing effectiveness. So you have to be very particular on who you want to fight in this, and sometimes you just have to let fights go and not engage. But I've lost like, I don't know, 6 or 8 of these things just trying to get footage. I mean, a lot of them end up just dying horribly because they just get overwhelmed. So for video content anyway, a lot of the fights are kind of one-sided, because that's the only kind of fights you get. Either you completely dominate whatever you fight, or you get completely overwhelmed. So that's kind of what we'll be seeing through the footage here. But how I have it fit, I try and keep it as cheap as possible. I have it fit with just a single XLASB because that gives you more actual tank than like a single large shield extender. You don't run an invuln on it just because you don't really have the space for it. Uh, I used to run it with 800 cap boosters, but I think it's better just to use a 3200 because the other benefit of that is once you run out of XLASB charges, you can sustain a few more charges using a 3200 rather than the 800s. It also kind of helps prevent counter neuting, so that's why I've switched over to using just the 3200s. Um, the You do triple BCU. One of the BCUs is a meta just because you need it for CPU reasons, and then the guidance enhancer to give you a little bit more range and more application. And then for the rigs, I used to do a single EM and a single thermal with a single application rig, but I just wasn't getting enough application on certain frigates, so I went ahead and just went with the dual rigger catalyst, and that got me a lot better application for what I was using it for. So this first fight was roaming out of my Nullsec, and ended up running across a Gnosis, a Praxis, a Stero, and a couple other things, but I was able to get the Praxis separated, and I let myself get tackled by this Stero. And you can kind of see this is the original fit, the old fit, so I didn't have the dual rigger rigs on it. This Astero is also afterburner fit, so that also doesn't help me. He actually has afterburner plus cap booster, so he was able to mitigate some of my neuting effects and keep the afterburner on. So I was having a lot of issues applying to him, and I didn't notice immediately that he was still able to keep his afterburner active, so I wasn't keeping him capped out with all my neuts. I was just kind of putting one or two on him. The Gnosis ended up kind of burning away to 150 so he could warp to the Astero. Thankfully, I finally was able to get the Astero down right as the Gnosis lands. And once the Astero goes down, I go ahead and switch to Rage missiles, since I can apply with Rage to the Gnosis. The nice thing here is that this Gnosis is blaster fit, so once I newt him out, a lot of the damage drops off from him. At the same time, they bring in a VNI at range, so thankfully he was not scram fit, he was just some kitey fit, I think. Once I put all the neuts on the Gnosis, he drops scram, and again, a lot of that damage gets dropped off as well. And I'm trying to pulse the XLASB just because I don't want to use up all my charges. But I need to use some of them just to sustain a little bit so I'm not bleeding into armor. And with Rage, I was able to apply well, and he was actually a triple rep fit, and he had dual cap boosters, I believe. But I was able to keep him neuted out to where he couldn't really use his armor reps, and he was, I was able to kill him really quick. Once the Gnosis goes down, I go ahead and just focus on putting all my neuts on the VNI just so he can drop point, and so I can warp to a belt. They did bring in a Demos and a Brutix, which I really wanted to fight those, but for whatever reason they didn't want to continue engaging me. If I had stayed there when that Demos landed, I might have been able to kill him, but then they had the Praxis and the Brutix show up shortly after, so I probably would have died at that point. But it would have been nice to get that Demos kill. But these are the realities of flying completely solo without any alts to kind of watch your back. This next fight is a kind of a similar situation that I ran into previously, but this is just it was a Gnosis and an Ashimu, and I've sped it up just because the Gnosis starts out kind of far away, and the fight itself isn't, super awesome. Kind of goes along the same way of I was neuting out the Gnosis. He was also a triple active rep fit. I don't know what was going on in Nullsec during that week, but I kept running into triple rep Gnosis fits. Again, same thing that happened here. He got completely neuted out. He couldn't really rep at all. The one thing that I wanted to kind of showcase in this video, which is an option for fitting, is the Ashimu actually warps back, and warps back right on top of where the Gnosis died. And due to the Rokh's slow lock speed though, I was not able to grab the Ashamu before he warped back away. So what you can do for the fitting if you want to try to avoid this is you could potentially drop the missile guidance enhancer and then use a SIG amp. And that'll get you a reasonable lock speed, so you can kind of grab things. But as you can see there, the Ashamu warped right off and I couldn't grab them. And this fight started where I was baiting a Vedmac. So he ended up tackling, and he ended up flying a little close to me. I don't know if this was accidental, because he's long point fit, but he flew too close, so I was able to get a scram and grapple on him. And then I just kind of hit him with staggered newts. And I mean, I probably didn't need to here, but I go ahead and pop crash and things like that. Again, in like single one-on-one fights like this, you probably don't need to take drugs every single time. But I think this is the second fight I had in this fit, so I wasn't sure of my application. So I just went ahead and did it. But again, as you can see, I have really good application on him. He's completely neutered out, so he can't, rep or do anything really, or do damage. So, again, not super exciting, but the fit does what I wanted it to do, which is to kill targets 1v1. Another area where I found the Torpedo Rokh to be pretty good at least surprising people is in faction warfare. So this Demos came in, I actually warped to a large plex and he warped to me. Now from the Demos' perspective, especially since he doesn't know I'm torpedoes, he thinks he has the advantage because most Rokhs are fit with blasters, which the Demos would have really good resistances to. As you can see, this Demos is doing a lot of damage to me, and I'm having a little bit of problems keeping my health up. And this Demos also has a cap battery, so it's taking me a little bit longer to actually get him capped out. I mean, the main thing is I'm not too worried about staggering newts in the beginning because you need to shock that cap battery to actually start chipping away at the cap. I do eventually stagger my newts a little bit towards the end, and thankfully it starts having an effect and he's not able to rep anymore and I can start recovering, and then he goes down. So in that fight, again, they thought they had the advantage because of resist profile, but with the torpedoes, I was able to kind of factor in the surprise along with the newts. And the last Rokh fight is in a kind of a back-end Lowsec system. I actually jumped into this system just kind of on a hunch. It was right next to Rins, and this is kind of an isolated Lowsec system. And this guy apparently has been killing ratters and kind of just sinos and stuff in the system. So I jumped in right as he was jumping out. So he burned back in to grab me on the other side in the Lowsec system because the other side is a high sec. So in doing so, he took gate guns. So not only is he now fighting my Torpedo Rokh with a bunch of newts, he is also taking gate guns. So that kind of increases my potential DPS since we're combining those two. He was only an XLASB fit, so he wasn't actually, full on active tanking, but I was able to, shut him down pretty quick, and I think he was using hail, so he wasn't really doing a ton of damage compared to like the Demos, since he was shooting into my highest resist. I was able to bring him down there. The funny thing though is that like I was expecting him to have some kind of pimp, but like the loot can was very unsatisfying, and that's why I'm kind of like scrolling back and forth. This is like, wow, that's the cheapest Sleipnir fit I've seen. But yeah, these like random back-end Lowsec systems are sometimes a lot of fun, just because there's people that live there normally and they don't run into a lot of PvP in general. So sometimes they're willing to fight you with, a normal comp, or you run into like solo guys like this. So it's always worth checking out those random isolated Lowsec systems, because they're also sometimes used for Sinos, and that generates fights too. Alright, well that does it for this video. This one went on pretty long because I know a lot of you guys are liking commentary now, so it takes a little bit more time to edit everything together and get the commentary to line up, which can sometimes cause the length of the video to increase. And also a lot of these fights aren't sped up, just because I wouldn't really be able to say a whole lot if they're if they're too quick. So I had to do a lot of them in just normal speed, and then the ones that I did speed up were either just, not very interesting, or they were very long fights due to, like, the Armageddon was all whole tank, so it took me probably at least 2 minutes to chew through that Armageddon by itself. But hope you guys enjoyed it, and my next videos are going to most likely be Nighthawk related and Caldari Interceptor related, at least for my PvP videos. And I'll probably throw in a few more theory balancing videos here and there just to kind of fill it out. But thanks for watching.